The phone rang just after midnight, its shrill tone cutting through the silence of the empty house. Sarah's heart raced as she hesitated, staring at the screen. The name that flashed before her eyes made her blood run cold. It was a name she thought she'd never see again, a name she had forced herself to forget. Her hand trembled as she answered. "Hello?" Her voice sounded strange, hollow, as if the very air had shifted. "Sarah," the voice on the other end was sharp, but there was something unsettlingly familiar about it. "We need to talk. It's about him." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She barely registered the rest of the sentence. "About him?" Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard. I don't know who you mean." "You know exactly who I mean," the voice replied, its coldness sending a shiver down her spine. "The one who left you with nothing but questions. The one who disappeared without a trace. You need to listen carefully. There's something you need to know." Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She tried to steady herself, her mind racing. The past, the one she'd spent so long burying, suddenly felt too close. It felt alive again, ready to suffocate her. There were too many questions. Too many things she had never understood. She'd spent years pretending they didn't matter, pretending to be at peace. But this call, this one conversation, was about to tear everything wide open. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice sharper than before. But her words were useless. She already knew who it was. Her heart knew, even before her brain could catch up. And the truth, cold and terrible, started to settle in her chest. "You're not going to like what I'm about to say," the voice warned, almost sympathetically. "But you need to hear it. I'm calling to tell you the truth about what happened all those years ago. About why you were left behind. About the secret that's been kept from you. The silence you've been living with, it wasn't an accident." The weight of those words hit Sarah like a slap. Her head spun, and she leaned against the wall for support. Her pulse hammered in her ears, louder than the voice on the phone. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why are you telling me this now?" The voice on the other end hesitated, as if considering something. "Because it's time. It's time for you to know the truth, Sarah. You can't move forward until you do." She clenched the phone tighter, a bead of sweat trickling down her neck. "What truth? What happened?" she asked, barely able to form the words. Her throat was dry, and her mind was racing. Her thoughts bounced from one to another, trying to piece together fragments of a story she'd never fully understood. "You were never meant to find out," the voice said, a hint of regret creeping into its tone. "But now, the pieces are falling into place. The truth is coming out. And you have to be ready for it." She felt the world shift beneath her feet, her grip on reality slipping away with each passing second. Her life, her carefully constructed life, was about to come crashing down, and she had no idea how to stop it. "Sarah," the voice's tone softened, almost as if it were trying to comfort her. "You've lived with this lie for too long. It's time to stop running. You deserve the truth. But you won't be able to handle it all at once. I'll tell you what you need to know, but you have to promise me one thing. No matter how hard it is, no matter what happens, you can't stop looking for answers. Not now. Not after everything that's happened. Stop running," she repeated, her voice a whisper. The words cut through the fog of confusion swirling in her mind. Was this some kind of cruel game? A prank? But deep down, she knew this wasn't a joke. It was real. And whatever was about to unfold would change everything she thought she knew about herself, about her past. The silence that followed was unbearable. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and erratic. Her thoughts raced, each one fighting to be heard. Was this what she had been waiting for? The answers she had longed for, the truth that had eluded her all these years? "I'll send you the details," the voice continued. "Meet me where it all started. You'll know the place. Don't tell anyone. Just you. Alone. Alone." The word echoed in her head like a threat, and for a split second, she hesitated. But the call had already stirred something inside her, something that couldn't be ignored. The need for answers was too strong. The curiosity, the fear, the need to finally understand why everything had gone wrong, it was all too much to deny. "Where?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere you'll never forget. I'll be waiting. Don't be late." And with that, the line went dead. Sarah was left holding the phone, her heart pounding in her chest, the world spinning around her. She didn't know how long she stood there, staring at the dark screen, as if the phone might suddenly ring again and give her more answers. But it didn't. The silence in the room felt suffocating, almost oppressive. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. There was no turning back now. The truth had been dangled in front of her, and the only thing left to do was follow the trail. She could walk away. She could refuse to face whatever lay ahead. But she knew that would never happen. Something inside her, something deep and primal, was telling her that she had to go. She had to know. Her hand shook as she reached for the door, the cold metal handle a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to move. She couldn't think anymore. She could only act. As she stepped into the night, the world felt different, like she was walking through a dream, unaware of what was real and what was just an illusion. The streetlights flickered above her, casting long, eerie shadows. She walked briskly, not caring where her feet took her. She had no idea what awaited her, but it didn't matter. She would face whatever it was. And then, in the distance, she saw it, the place where it all began. The place she had tried to forget. The place that would hold the answers to everything she had ever wondered. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty street, each step pulling her further away from the safety of her home, and deeper into the unknown. She had never felt so alone. The wind bit at her skin, making her shiver, but the cold was nothing compared to the storm raging in her chest. Questions swirled around in her mind, but there was no room for answers, not yet. She had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, even though every instinct told her to turn back. The place the voice had mentioned, it was a block away, just around the corner. She could see the outline of the building now, its once grand facade now crumbling with age. The faint glow of the streetlight cast eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. Sarah stopped for a moment, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the place. The one where it all began. For years, she had kept the memories locked away, buried so deep she couldn't even recall most of it. But now, standing here in front of the building, they all came flooding back. The whispers. The laughter. The tears. The confusion. It had all started here. She had been so young then, too young to understand what was happening, too innocent to realize that everything she knew about the world was about to be turned upside down. It had been a summer night, much like this one. A time of warmth, of hope, of possibilities. But that night had been different. That night, everything changed. It was the night her life had split into two parts, before and after. Sarah took a deep breath and moved toward the entrance. Her footsteps slowed, and she glanced around, checking to see if anyone was watching. But the street was empty, and the silence was suffocating. As she reached for the door, she hesitated. Was this a mistake? Was she really ready for whatever lay on the other side of that door? The answer was simple. She had no choice. The door creaked open with a loud groan, and Sarah stepped inside. The air inside was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. The building had long since been abandoned, but there was something unsettling about it. The walls, once full of life, were now empty. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet, as if the building itself were protesting her presence. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of life. But there was nothing. Just shadows and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. Then, she saw it. A door at the far end of the room, slightly ajar. A sliver of light escaped through the gap, casting a faint glow on the floor. Without thinking, Sarah began walking toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of her past was pushing down on her shoulders, urging her to stop. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to the answers she had been seeking for so long. When she reached the door, she paused. Her hand trembled as she pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, facing away from her. The air inside was thick, almost oppressive, as if it had been waiting for her to arrive. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room was silent, save for the soft sound of her breath. Sarah's heart raced as she approached the chair, her steps slow and deliberate. Who was waiting for her here? What did they want? Sarah, the voice came from behind her, cold and familiar. It sent a chill down her spine. She froze, her body tense with fear. Turning around, she found herself face to face with someone she hadn't seen in years. The man standing before her was tall, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to pierce through her. His expression was unreadable, his face a mask of both regret and determination. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. She had to know, had to understand what was going on. "What is this?" The man didn't answer immediately. He simply stared at her, his gaze intense, as though weighing her every word. Then, slowly, he spoke. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Sarah's mind raced. She was sure she had never seen him before, yet there was something so familiar about him. Something in the way he stood, in the way his eyes met hers. I don't understand," she stammered. "What's going on here? Who are you? What do you know about me?" The man stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. "You were too young back then, Sarah," he said softly. "Too young to understand the truth. But now you're ready." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What truth? What was he talking about? "You're talking about him," she whispered. The name felt strange on her tongue, almost foreign. But she couldn't deny it. "You're talking about the man who disappeared." The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm talking about the man who changed your life forever. The man who left you with nothing but questions." Sarah felt a cold wave wash over her, the weight of the past crashing down on her shoulders. She had spent so long trying to forget, trying to live a normal life, but nothing about this was normal. And now, standing in front of this stranger, she realized that the story she had been living for so long was a lie. A lie that was about to be uncovered. "Why did he leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did he leave me?" The man's expression softened, just for a moment. Then, his eyes darkened. "It wasn't his choice, Sarah," he said. "And it wasn't yours either. There were forces at work that you couldn't understand, forces that you still don't understand. But the time has come for you to learn the truth." The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in, the air thick with tension. Sarah felt a surge of panic rising in her chest. She wanted to run, to escape, to forget all of this. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close to the answers she had spent her entire life searching for. "Tell me what happened," she demanded. "Tell me the truth." The man studied her for a long moment before finally speaking again. "It's complicated," he said. "But I'll start at the beginning. You remember when he left, don't you?" Sarah nodded, her throat tightening at the memory. It had been the worst day of her life. The day her whole world fell apart. He didn't leave because he wanted to, the man continued. He didn't leave because he didn't care about you. He left because he had no choice. The words hit Sarah like a slap. She wanted to scream, to shout at him to stop, to tell him that it didn't make sense, that none of this made sense. But she couldn't speak. All she could do was listen. He was forced to leave, the man said. And so were you. It wasn't just about him disappearing. It was about protecting you. About keeping you safe from something bigger, something that you still don't understand. Protecting me? Sarah echoed, her voice shaking with disbelief. From what? From who? The man's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and guilt. From the truth, he said softly. From the people who would do anything to keep it hidden. Sarah's mind reeled. There was so much more to this story, so much more than she had ever imagined. And yet, she could feel it, the darkness, the danger, the secrets that had been buried for too long. The truth was out there. But the question was, would she be able to handle it? The man's words echoed in Sarah's mind, reverberating through the silent room. Protecting her. The truth. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest like an invisible hand, making it harder to breathe. She had never imagined that the story of her life, everything she thought she knew, was a lie. And now, standing before this stranger, she realized she had barely scratched the surface of the truth. From the truth? Sarah repeated, her voice barely audible. What truth? What could be so terrible that it would force someone to disappear from my life? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. His eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on hers, as if he could see through her, to the very core of her being. You don't understand yet, do you? He asked quietly, almost pityingly. You've lived your whole life without knowing the real reason. Without understanding why everything happened the way it did. Sarah's mind was spinning. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, and one wrong step would send her tumbling into a darkness she wasn't ready to face. But the curiosity, the burning need for answers, wouldn't let her stop. She had to know the truth. No matter how terrifying it might be. Tell me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, tell me what happened. The man nodded slowly, and for the first time, a shadow of sadness crossed his face. It's not just your story, Sarah, he said. It's his too. And it's a story that goes beyond just the two of you. There are people who don't want this story to come out. People who have done everything in their power to keep it buried. He paused, as though trying to find the right words, or perhaps to decide how much to reveal. Sarah stood there, her heart racing, waiting for him to continue. Your father wasn't just a regular man, Sarah, he said, finally. He wasn't the simple, hard-working guy you remember. There was so much more to him, so much that you could never have known. Stop, Sarah cut him off, her voice shaking. What are you talking about? My father was, just my father. The man shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his lips. You don't know the half of it. Your father was involved in something big. Something dangerous. And he wasn't the only one. There were others, people like him, who were forced to make choices. And those choices, they affected everyone around them. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine as the words sank in. No, she said, her voice thick with disbelief. My father wasn't like that. He was a good man. He cared about me. He wouldn't have left if it wasn't absolutely necessary. The man's gaze softened, but his words were firm. He left because he had no choice. And so did you. Sarah's head was spinning. The pieces of her life, the small fragments of memories that had never quite made sense, were starting to come together in a way that terrified her. She had always wondered why her father had left, why he had disappeared without a trace. Now she was beginning to understand that there was more to the story, so much more. But she couldn't accept it. She couldn't believe that the man she had loved so much, the man who had been her world, had been hiding something so dark. "You said it was dangerous," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of danger? Who are these people? And why didn't he ever tell me the truth?" The man looked at her with an expression that was almost pitying. "You weren't supposed to know. No one was. But you were always meant to be part of this, Sarah. You've been a part of it since the beginning, even if you didn't realize it." Sarah's chest tightened. "Part of what?" He exhaled slowly, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "Your father was part of a group, a secret group. A group that was trying to uncover something so powerful that it could change everything. They were searching for answers, for knowledge that was buried deep, hidden from the world. But they weren't the only ones searching." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "So my father wasn't just some guy who left me. He was part of something bigger. Something dangerous?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes. And so were you. That's why he had to disappear. That's why you had to be hidden away." Sarah shook her head, the confusion mounting. "I don't understand. How am I part of this? What do you mean, hidden away?" The man's eyes flickered with something like fear. "You're not just a victim in this, Sarah. You're the key. The answers they were looking for, the secrets they wanted to uncover, those secrets are tied to you." The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in, suffocating her. She backed up a step, her mind racing. "I don't believe you. This can't be real. You're telling me I'm part of some conspiracy? That my father, he was involved in something like that?" The man stepped forward, his face a mask of seriousness. "I'm not asking you to believe me, Sarah. I'm telling you the truth. And the truth is, the longer you stay in the dark, the more dangerous it becomes for you." Suddenly, everything felt surreal. She had always believed her life was normal, even after her father's disappearance. But now, standing in this dusty room, she realized how wrong she had been. The life she had known was built on a lie, and the truth was something far darker than she could ever have imagined. Sarah felt her knees go weak as the man's words sank in deeper, the weight of the situation almost too much to bear. The fear, the confusion, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal all mixed together inside her. She wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare, but she couldn't. The man's words held her captive, and she knew deep down that she had to face whatever was coming next. "So what happens now?" Sarah whispered. "What do I do with this knowledge? How do I even begin to understand all of this?" The man stepped back, his expression unreadable. "That's up to you, Sarah. You have the power to uncover the rest of the story. But you have to be careful. There are people watching you. People who want to stop you from finding the truth." The words hung in the air like a threat, and for the first time, Sarah realized just how dangerous this journey was going to be. Sarah's hands trembled as she held onto the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. Her mind raced, still trying to comprehend the gravity of the man's words. People watching her? The very idea was chilling. She had always believed her life was just, ordinary. A quiet existence. But now, everything was different. The truth, whatever it was slowly starting to surface, and it terrified her. Yet, there was a part of her that couldn't stop herself from wanting more answers. She had to know why her father had left, why her whole life had been a lie. Her heart pounded in her chest. As the man stood silently in front of her, waiting for her to speak, as though he knew that she was processing everything in her mind. Her head swam with questions, each one more urgent than the last. "Who are these people?" Sarah finally asked, her voice steady but tinged with anxiety. Why are they after me? Why now? What do they want? The man sighed deeply and took a step closer, lowering his voice so it was barely a whisper. I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I can tell you this, the people you're up against, they're not just ordinary people. They have power, connections, anything they want, they can get. And they won't stop until they've silenced anyone who knows too much. Her mind flashed to the events over the past few months, the strange encounters, the eerie feeling of being watched, the unsettling sense that something was off. But she hadn't known what. Now, it all started to make sense. She wasn't just being paranoid. Something was out there, something she was supposed to be a part of, but had never known until now. How do you know all this? Sarah pressed, her voice trembling with fear. Who are you really? What do you want from me? The man hesitated. It was the first time since they'd started talking that he seemed unsure, almost as though he was debating whether to reveal more. He finally spoke, but his words were cryptic. My name is Daniel. I used to work with your father. We were part of something together. Something that went deeper than either of us could have anticipated. Something that changed everything. Sarah's mind flashed back to the times her father had talked about his work, the late nights when he'd come home looking tired and secretive. He had always been so distant, never letting her in on the details. And now, she realized he'd been keeping secrets, big ones, secrets that had now come back to haunt her. Your father was a part of a network, Sarah. A group of individuals who were trying to uncover something far bigger than anything you can imagine, Daniel continued. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about knowledge. The kind of knowledge that could change the world. And your father, well, he was one of the few who had access to it. The room seemed to close in around her. Her breath became shallow, her pulse quickening. This was no longer about her father's disappearance. This was about something much bigger. Something that threatened everything she knew. But why me? Why do I matter? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel took another step forward, his gaze locking with hers. Because you're the key, Sarah. You were born into this. Your father protected you from it, but now, they're coming after you. They think you know something. They think you have what they've been searching for. Sarah's mind spun as she tried to absorb the weight of his words. Her father's past was already a tangled mess of secrets and lies. And now she was at the center of it all. What could she possibly have that they wanted? Why didn't my father tell me all of this, she asked, her voice cracking with frustration. Why did he keep it from me? Daniel's expression softened, his eyes showing a flicker of sympathy. He did what he thought was best for you. He wanted to keep you safe, Sarah. He knew what this world could do to someone who knew too much. He kept you in the dark because he thought it would protect you. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She had always loved her father. She had always believed he was doing the best he could. But now, she didn't know what to believe anymore. Had he truly been protecting her? Or had he kept her in the dark because he didn't trust her? I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Daniel looked at her, his expression hardening. You don't have a choice. They're already watching you. They know who you are. They know what you're capable of, and they won't stop until they have what they want. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of his words hit her. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, with people she didn't know, all of them after something she had no idea how to find. The fear began to crawl up her spine again. How was she supposed to fight against something like that? Who could she even trust? Who can I trust? Sarah asked, her voice desperate. How do I know who's on my side? Daniel hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for hidden threats. You can trust me, he said finally. But you have to be careful. There are others who are working against you. People you wouldn't expect. People you might even trust. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The idea of someone close to her being part of this conspiracy made her stomach churn. She had always trusted the people around her, but now, how could she be sure? How could she know who was a friend and who was an enemy? I don't know where to start, Sarah said, her voice shaky. What do I do? How do I find out what's really going on? Daniel's face hardened. We start by uncovering the truth. We find out what your father was involved in, and we dig deep. The answers are out there, Sarah. But you have to be prepared for what you're going to find. Her mind raced, and her stomach twisted in knots. She didn't know if she was ready for what lay ahead. But she knew one thing for sure, she couldn't turn back. The truth was out there, waiting for her to uncover it. And if she didn't, the people who were after her would find it first. Where do we start? She asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Daniel paused for a moment before answering. We start by going to your father's old office. There's something there, something he left behind that could help us. But we have to be careful. We don't know who's watching. Without another word, Daniel turned and headed for the door, his movements swift and purposeful. Sarah followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of what was happening settled over her like a heavy cloak. This was no longer about finding her father, it was about uncovering a truth that could change everything. As she stepped out into the night, the chill of the air hit her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was ready to find out. The air was thick with anticipation as Sarah and Daniel approached the old building that had once been her father's office. It had been years since she'd seen the place, and it looked just as abandoned now as it had when her father had left. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the windows were dark, as though the world outside had long since forgotten this place. Sarah felt a pit form in her stomach. There was something about this place, the silence, the emptiness, that felt suffocating. It was as though the building itself was holding on to secrets, unwilling to let go. And now, she was here, about to uncover whatever had been hidden for so long. Daniel led the way, his face set in grim determination. He had been quiet since their conversation in the car, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder what else he knew, what other secrets he was holding back. She had learned to trust him, but she was still uncertain about everything that had been said. The more she learned, the more questions kept popping up, and each one seemed to lead to another. They reached the entrance, and Daniel paused, glancing over his shoulder at her. We have to be quick. I'm not sure how much time we have before someone notices we're here. Sarah nodded, her heart racing. There was so much at stake now. The answers she was searching for were just beyond this door, and yet, she could feel the weight of danger closing in around her. She wasn't just looking for answers anymore. She was looking for a way out. Daniel pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The space was dimly lit, and the air smelled stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It was just like she remembered, old filing cabinets, dusty papers scattered on desks, and shelves filled with forgotten things. But this time, it all felt different. This time, everything held meaning. Where do we start? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Follow me, Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. He moved quickly, heading toward a back room that Sarah had never seen before. She followed him, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Her nerves were on edge, and every little sound made her jump. They reached the back room, and Daniel pushed open the door. It was smaller than the rest of the office, but it felt significant. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but they weren't filled with books. Instead, they were stacked with files, thick folders, some labeled, some not. Some were old, the edges worn and frayed, while others seemed almost brand new. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice tense. "Your father kept all of his most important work in here. It's where he kept the files on the group he was working with, the ones that were trying to uncover the truth." Sarah's mind raced as she took in the sight of the files. So many unanswered questions. She could feel her father's presence in this room, his thoughts, his work, his secrets. She didn't know if she was ready for what she was about to uncover, but there was no turning back now. Daniel began pulling files from the shelves, flipping through them quickly before setting them aside. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for one of the folders. The name on the label read, Project Athena, a name that meant nothing to her. But it felt important, like it was the first clue in a much larger puzzle. As Sarah opened the folder, she could barely make out the words through the haze of dust and age. The pages were filled with technical jargon, research data, and diagrams. But something caught her eye. There, at the bottom of one of the pages, was her father's signature. And beneath it, a name she had never seen before, Nathaniel Black. Her heart skipped a beat. She'd never heard that name before, but somehow, she knew it was important. Her father had worked with this person. And whatever they had been doing, it was big, bigger than she could have ever imagined. "Who's Nathaniel Black?" Sarah asked, turning to Daniel, her voice thick with confusion. "What's Project Athena?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Nathaniel Black was part of the same group your father was involved in. They were researching something dangerous. Something that could change everything." Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts swirling as she tried to connect the dots. What kind of research? What were they trying to uncover? Daniel shook his head. "I don't know all the details, but whatever they were working on, it wasn't for the public. It wasn't something that was meant to be known. And now, it's clear that someone doesn't want that information to get out." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Who? Who would want to keep this a secret? "I can't say for sure," Daniel replied. "But the group your father was working with, they were powerful. They had connections, resources that most people don't even know exist." Sarah's mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known that her father had been involved in something big, but she had never realized the scale of it. And now, the more she learned, the more she realized just how dangerous the situation was. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We keep going," Daniel said firmly. "There's more to uncover here. More clues that could lead us to the truth. We have to find. Lead us to the truth. We have to find out what your father knew, and why he kept it from you." Sarah nodded, determination flooding her veins. She couldn't stop now. She had come too far. The truth was just within reach, and she wouldn't stop until she had all the answers. But as she reached for another file, a sudden noise from outside the room froze her in her tracks. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Someone was coming. Daniel's eyes widened in alarm. "We need to move. Now." Sarah's heart raced as she grabbed the closest file and stuffed it into her bag. Daniel pulled her toward the door, his movements quick and urgent. They couldn't get caught, not now, not when they were so close to the answers they had been searching for. As they reached the door, Sarah glanced back at the room. Her father's secrets were buried here, hidden in the files and papers. But now, they were in danger of being lost forever. Whatever it was her father had uncovered, it was clear that someone wanted to keep it hidden. And they would do anything to stop Sarah from finding out the truth. But there was no turning back now. Sarah had made a promise to herself, and she intended to keep it. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And nothing, not even the threat of danger, would stop her. As they sprinted down the narrow corridor, Sarah's mind raced. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and she knew they didn't have much time left. Her heart hammered in her chest, a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. They were dangerously close to uncovering everything her father had hidden. But now, it was a race against time. They reached the main door, and Daniel didn't hesitate. He yanked it open, guiding Sarah through it. The cool night air hit them like a slap in the face, but there was no time to pause. They had to get out, fast. "Where do we go now?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, his face tight with urgency. "We don't stop until we're far away from here. We'll figure it out then." They kept running, turning corners, dodging shadows. Sarah's mind kept replaying the file she had grabbed, the mention of Nathaniel Black and Project Athena. Her father had been working on something that was clearly bigger than anyone had realized. But what was it? What danger had he uncovered? She didn't know, but she had to find out. After what felt like an eternity of running, they finally reached the car. Daniel started the engine with a roar, and they sped off into the night. As the building faded from view, Sarah finally exhaled, though the weight of the mystery still sat heavy on her shoulders. "I can't believe what we found," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "How much of this did you know?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched. "Not enough. But I knew it was big. Your father was trying to uncover something dangerous. And now it's clear that someone will stop at nothing to keep it buried. But why didn't he tell me?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "Why didn't he warn me?" Daniel's eyes flicked to her for a brief moment. "Some things are too dangerous to share. He probably hoped you'd never get involved in this. But now, you are." A cold silence fell between them as Sarah processed his words. This wasn't just about her father anymore. This was about something much bigger, and it was clear she had only scratched the surface. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous the truth became. And then, just as she was about to speak again, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her hands shaking as she saw the message. It was a simple sentence, but it made her blood run cold. "We know you have the file." This moment would leave Sarah with even more questions, and it sets the stage for the final chapter where she confronts the forces behind her father's secrecy and uncovers the truth, at any cost.